It's Ken Harbaugh with Against All Enemies on the MeidasTouch Network. We've got Mike Breen back, Army combat vet, CEO of Human Rights First. And Mike has often said, I'm paraphrasing, he's much more eloquent than I am, that human rights depends on democracy. Democracy is one of the building blocks. And so I want to talk to him about the continued and persistent anti-democratic impulse of the extreme right. Well, not even the extreme right anymore. Let's roll the clip of Steve Scalise, leader within the Republican Party, on the short list for Speaker of the House, which would have put him 2 heartbeats away from the presidency, denying 5 times in a row that the election was not stolen. Roll the clip.
Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Well, what I've told you is there are states that didn't follow their laws. That is what the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution requires. I've seen in my own state where we had to send our elections commissioner to jail years ago for fraud and corruption, and we cleaned up our act in our state. Every state ought to follow the laws that are on their books. That's what the U.S. Constitution says.
That's not what I asked. I said, can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Look, Joe Biden's president. I know you and others want to talk about 2020. We're focused on the future. We've talked about 2020 a lot. We're talking about how to get our country back on track, how to get our economy moving, how to stand up to the bad actors around the world. Xi is not slowing down in China. He's looking at Taiwan. You see what's going on in Russia. You see what Iran is doing to work with Hamas and other terrorist organizations. This administration needs to pick up the pace. They're not standing up to the bad actors around the world. They need to. We're passing bills to address this through the House. The Senate needs to take action. The president needs to take action as well. That's what we're focused on in the House.
I know that Joe Biden is president. I'm asking you a different question. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
What I've told you, and you've seen this, there are states that didn't follow the laws that are on their books, which is what the U.S. Constitution says they have to do.
So you just refuse to say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
So you want to keep rehashing 2020? We're talking.
I just want an answer to the question, yes or no.
Threats to this country. We've talked about this before, but again, will you acknowledge that there were states that didn't follow the actual state legislative enacted laws on their books, which the U.S. Constitution says they're supposed to do?
I know that every court that looked at whether the election was stolen said it wasn't, rejected those claims. And I asked you a very, very simple question. Now I've asked it, I think, the 5th time that you can't appear to answer. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
I told you there were a handful of states that didn't follow their laws. The rest did. The rest followed. And again, states that Trump won, states that Biden won, that did follow.
All right, Mike, I don't think I've seen a cringier episode on mainstream TV, at least, than this. What do you make of it?
I mean, it's cringy for sure, and one of the reasons I think it's so cringy, Ken, is that I don't believe for a second that Steve Scalise believes a word he's saying. Right? He's dancing around trying to avoid, saying something that he feels like he politically cannot say, but that he knows to be the truth, which is that the election was not stolen. Steve Scalise is not a real MAGA guy. He's been in Congress for a really long time. I don't agree with him on a lot of things politically, and that's a matter of public record. I've testified in front of him a number of times in various committees on various issues, and we've had some contentious exchanges. That said, he did not come into politics as part of the Trump movement or as part of an anti-democratic right-wing extremist movement. He came into Congress as a fairly traditional, Louisiana Republican. A friend of big oil, certainly not willing to talk about climate change, but a pretty standard Republican politician from Louisiana. And now you find that despite, his power and his ascendance in the House, the guy can't say the simple truth because he's afraid of somebody who isn't even in office right now, and afraid of a mob being weaponized against him. And I think that what that tells you is that there's an anti-democratic extremist movement that's managed to intimidate its way into control, de facto in this case, or eventually, maybe something more than that if Trump is elected again or something else happens, but control of one of the nation's 2 political parties. Incredibly dangerous.
You and I follow this really closely. For those who might not be tracking 100%, what we're talking about is Donald Trump's 100% consistent record on punishing those who say he lost the election. That's what we're talking about. When Steve Scalise refuses to say that Donald Trump lost, when anybody refuses to say that Donald Trump lost within the Republican Party, the hammer comes down. And of all of the things Trump has been inconsistent about, and that's most of the things, most of his life, this is one thing that he has drawn a line on. Anyone in a position of power within the Republican Party who says he lost the election faces his wrath.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that wrath takes some pretty specific forms, right? I mean, part of this is the gerrymandering of congressional districts, and that just means that the lines have been drawn unfairly so many times that the only thing most Republican congressmen have to fear is a challenge in the primary from the right, is a more extreme Republican, right? So there's that. You speak out against Donald Trump, he might finance or incite a right-wing challenger, somebody who says you're not conservative enough, no matter how many times you try to prove that you're far right enough, and takes your job. But it goes much deeper than that. And I think we saw this when Jim Jordan was trying to become the speaker. And, he claims he didn't have anything to do with it, but launched an intimidation campaign against moderate Republican members who didn't want to vote for him that included people calling their wives and threatening to kill them, death threats. People had to get security. People lived in fear of physical violence. And that's intimidation on a whole new level. So when we say, Donald Trump and his allies will come after you, we're not just talking about coming after you politically. We're talking about maybe coming to your house in the middle of the night. Right. And that's violent extremism. That's not politics anymore. That's something else.
What's mind-boggling about Steve Scalise's cowardice on this issue is that he has been a victim of a conspiracy theory that led to a violent attack. Give us the short version of what happened to him, and even that is not enough to. I was going to say awaken him to the dangers of these conspiracy theories, but as you've said, they all know the truth. They're just afraid to say it. But Steve Scalise is, of all people, I would have thought would be able to see where this leads.
Absolutely. I mean, what happened to him is unbelievably tragic. I don't actually know the details of what deranged, theories were in the shooter's mind, but I mean, Steve Scalise was shot in the middle of a softball game with other members of Congress, as I recall. He nearly lost his life. He was shot with a rifle, I believe. So that's pretty clear evidence that sending people crazy messages in politics can result in really horrible things, and we've seen this all the time. The same, great replacement theory, conspiracy theory that says, Democratic Party wants to replace white voters with minority voters and immigrants, and that's what's going on in politics now. You hear that out of the mouths of a lot of politicians and media people on the right. We also know that that's the manifesto, the ideology, very explicitly behind most of the mass shootings we're seeing that are motivated by politics. Whether that's the El Paso Walmart shooting, attacks on synagogues, the list goes on. People are taking up arms because they've been led to believe that their democracy and their society is under threat, and the core of that entire thing is this big lie about the 2020 election. I mean, if you believe that your democracy has already been stolen from you and that regular politics is broken, then what's left but violence? This leads to a very dangerous place.
Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind trick from your wacky neighbor or some sketchy message board. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong. So instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your bad habit. The first time I used Fume, I was surprised at how it's so easy to hold and perfectly balanced, and quite honestly fun to fidget with. The real wood material and sleek design definitely classes it up. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use code BOATS to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code BOATS to save an additional 10% off your order today. Thanks for listening, everyone. I've got a quick break here, but I need a favor first. Shows like this depend on your support. Please, if you can spare 5 seconds, click the link to the podcast version of the show below and leave us a 5-star review. It really does help. Thanks. What really frightens me and leaves me bereft about the ability of our system to react to this is just how quickly this theory overtook rank and file Republicans. I remember in the days after the 2020 election, the overwhelming majority of Republicans said it was free and fair. And that number began to fall off as the misinformation machine began turning its gears, as Trump began parroting or leading the big lie from the bully pulpit, and as just about every one of these Republican representatives served as an amplifier for that. And now we're at a point where, I mean, it's so, what's Mark Twain's quote? A lie travels around the world twice before the truth can put its pants on. Now, I don't know how we unwind that when you have so many rank and file Republicans, everyday Republicans, who say that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. And I want to make the point with this clip of Christie at a conference, a meeting in Miami of, I have to assume, mostly MAGA Republicans. But, you know, we're in Florida. We're approaching primary season. These are the folks who drive the agenda within the Republican Party, Republican primary voters. And he is heckled mercilessly. But to his credit, I'm not a Christie fan, to his immense credit, he calls their fear of the truth reprehensible. Play that clip.
Yeah. Well, now it feels like home. Thank you all very much. Let me first thank the chairman and everyone here. Yep. Look. What a shock. You're for Trump. I'm going to fall over dead. Now look. Every one of those boos, every one of those catcalls, every one of those yells will not keep it. Yes, sure. Will not solve one problem we face in this country. Will not solve, and will not make this country better. Your anger against the truth is reprehensible. When you think about the problems that our country and this world is facing, when you think about that, this type of pettiness is beneath the process of electing a president. Yeah. And as people watch today, if your arguments are so strong, if your arguments are so great and mine are so bad, then just keep quiet. Let me make my awful arguments, and then you can just reject them out of hand. But the problem is you fear the truth.
So we have Christie telling the truth. You can just, I mean, I was waiting for him to use the word deplorable. It looked like it was on the tip of his tongue. He held back. But that is basically what he's saying when he's standing there in front of this angry mob being jeered and heckled and saying, this is just coming to mind now, but Colonel Nathan Jessup, you can't handle the truth, right?
Right.
That's Christie in that moment. And I think he is speaking an uncomfortable truth, that the truth about the election is poison to this Republican base now.
I think that's right. And I think I'm not a big Christie fan either. But I do think not only is he telling the truth, but I have to say I think he's, in a longer term sense, acting like a rational politician when a lot of these guys aren't, right? I mean, let's go back to Steve Scalise. This guy's been in Congress for a long time. A big part of his job is to try to build a Republican majority, which means he's got to get people to go out and vote for Republicans. Usually when somebody's trying to get you to go vote, right, they're going to tell you that your vote matters, that this is a critical moment for democracy, that your voice is important. It's important for you to get off the couch and make your way down to your polling place and go through that process, right? What's striking to me about this is that a lot of Republicans who are professional politicians are telling their base the opposite. Your vote doesn't matter because the system is rigged, which is a very stupid thing to do from a political perspective. Unless what you're trying to do is create a radical movement, and unless you're doing it because, despite the fact you know better, you're scared of people. You're physically afraid, and you're afraid of being torn down by a mob, basically. So it really does, I think, speak to the level of fear that, and just the level that an irrational extremism has kind of captured this political party. And unfortunately, we see this around the world. When a fringe movement that wants to replace the democratic political system with something that they control, they want to stop having elections, they want to win or steal an election so they can stop having them. When that movement is able to capture a political party, a major one in a country, it's a serious warning sign, and that means we've entered a place where it really you really are at risk, not just of violence, but of the collapse of the democracy. And unfortunately, I think we got to be honest, that's where we are.
I really appreciate your framing of that, because the next sentence after your vote doesn't matter is something else does. And that's right. Taking to the streets. That's violence. That's intimidation. If you can't get what you want in a democracy by voting, the implication is you need to take it to extremes. And I think that's what we're seeing in the kinds of attacks we're starting to see arise. And you have experience with this as the CEO of Human Rights First. When democracy goes, violence follows.
Every time. It's not going to get better for you, whatever group you think you're part of, if the democracy collapses. It just isn't. And I think the only people who believe that it will are people so naive that they haven't looked around the world or seen some of the things that Ken, you and I and others who've served have seen. The exception to that is to me really tragic, which is there's a minority certainly, but an important minority of veterans who've gotten to be part of this extremist movement. And I think the tragedy of that is that they've been co-opted into trying to destroy democracy because they believe they're saving it, right? This is the power of the lie about the 2020 election. If you believe the democracy's already been destroyed and you're the last-ditch defender of it, you're going to be manipulated into doing something that's completely against your values because you believe in a world that doesn't exist. You believe the lie. And I think a lot of our brothers and sisters who showed up on January 6th showed up thinking they were there to save democracy, and were physically trying to destroy it. Yeah. And that really breaks my heart. It's easy to demonize people, but I think we got to put the blame where it really belongs, and that's the people selling the lies.
That's right. Almost always from a safe distance, far away from the barricades, they're pushing the others over the walls into into the cannons, and it's just the epitome of cowardice. Mike, thanks as always for joining us. We'll see you back here soon.
See you soon, Ken. Thanks.